You know, there's a kind of person in this world who feels everything a little deeper than most. They walk into a room and can sense tension before a word is spoken. They notice when someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes. They can read the pauses between sentences like lines in a book. That person is the super empath. Now, here's the thing about being that person, it's both a gift and a curse. You see, super empaths attract avoidance like magnets attract metal. It's almost poetic. The empath wants to understand, to connect, to soothe. The avoidant, they crave closeness but fear it at the same time. It's a dance of distance and desire. The empath moves closer, the avoidant steps back. The empath reaches out again, the avoidant shuts down. But the day the super empath learns to master their emotional energy, that's the day the dance changes. The empath realizes they don't need to chase understanding from someone who runs from connection. They start to see that love isn't proven by how much pain you can endure or how long you can wait for someone to come around. Real love, healthy love shows up, communicates, and grows with you. When the empath learns this, they stop overgiving. They stop fixing, rescuing, and over-explaining. They begin to mirror the avoidance distance not out of revenge, but out of respect for their own peace. They understand silence doesn't always mean punishment, sometimes it's protection. Here's the magic. When the empath pulls back, the avoidant feels something they've never felt before, space that isn't filled with chasing, but calm confidence. The empath's absence speaks louder than all their attempts to be understood. That's when the balance of power shifts. The super empath doesn't win by manipulation, games, or revenge. They win by awareness. They know that emotional intelligence isn't about predicting others, it's about protecting yourself. They win by saying, I see your wounds, but I refuse to let them become mine. That's when everything changes, because when a super empath starts valuing themselves as much as they value others, they stop attracting people who drain them. Instead, they attract partners who match their emotional depth, not just their intensity. And the avoidant, they'll notice. They'll realize the empath they once took for granted has found peace, and that peace is far more powerful than any chase. So, if you're the super empath, remember, your strength isn't in how much you feel, it's in how well you choose what deserves your feeling. You don't have to love the avoidant. Just outgrow them. Emotional awareness is the invisible armor that a super empath wears once they begin to understand their own power. In the beginning, the empath often experiences emotions as chaos, a flood of feelings that come from everyone around them. They absorb moods, intentions, and unsaid words like sponges. When someone is sad, they feel it as if it were their own pain. When someone withdraws, they sense it before any message is left unread. But emotional awareness transforms this sensitivity from a weakness into wisdom. It teaches the empath to recognize this feeling isn't mine, and that single realization becomes the line between empathy and self-destruction. The empath who learns emotional awareness stops being at the mercy of other people's storms. They start to notice the difference between reacting and responding. A reaction is impulsive, it's emotional survival. A response, however, is conscious, it's emotional mastery. When an avoidant partner pulls away or goes silent, the unaware empath might spiral into overthinking, asking what they did wrong, rewriting every conversation in their mind. But the emotionally aware empath pauses. They take a breath and realize, this distance isn't a reflection of my worth. It's a reflection of their coping pattern. That pause is where peace begins. Emotional awareness gives the empath the power to observe without absorbing. Instead of drowning in someone else's emotions, they can stand at the shore and simply watch the waves. They can recognize, I can care deeply and still remain grounded. This awareness allows them to maintain empathy without losing their center. It's what separates a drained empath from a wise empath. The wise empath feels everything but chooses what deserves to stay. Awareness also changes the way the empath communicates. Instead of chasing clarity from someone who hides behind emotional walls, they start to speak from self-knowledge. They might say, I understand you need space, but I also have needs, and I won't abandon them to keep your comfort intact. That kind of self-expression doesn't come from anger, it comes from awareness. It's firm, calm, and free from emotional panic. It sets a tone of maturity that most avoidants aren't used to, and it quietly demands respect without saying a single word about it. This awareness also helps the empath identify emotional manipulation, even the subtle kind. When an avoidant tries to shift blame or minimize the empath's needs, the emotionally aware empath doesn't fall for it. They no longer interpret withdrawal as a cue to give more love or silence as a challenge to be louder. Instead, they see it as information, a sign of someone's emotional limits, not a reflection of their own shortcomings. That awareness becomes clarity, and clarity is freedom. Ultimately, emotional awareness transforms empathy into discernment. The empath begins to realize that not everyone deserves full emotional access to them. They can still be kind, but they're no longer naive. They understand that their emotional depth is not meant to fill other people's voids, it's meant to guide them toward truth, peace, and authenticity. Emotional awareness doesn't make them colder, it makes them clearer, and in that clarity, they finally reclaim their power. Boundaries are often misunderstood by empaths as barriers that block love, but in truth, they are what allow love to flow in its healthiest form. The super empath learns, often after deep emotional exhaustion, that boundaries are not built to keep people out, but to keep their own peace intact. When an empath constantly overextends, gives endlessly, and prioritizes someone else's comfort over their own emotional balance, they begin to lose sight of where they end and where the other person begins. That loss of self is what makes them vulnerable to avoidant partners, people who thrive on distance but enjoy the security of being emotionally pursued. Boundaries change that dynamic. They turn the empath's compassion into strength and their silence into wisdom. When a super empath starts setting boundaries, the first shift happens internally. They stop equating silence with rejection. They realize that choosing to step back or not respond immediately doesn't mean they love less. It means they value themselves more. For years, they may have filled every emotional gap with words, reassurance, or presence. But boundaries teach them that sometimes the most loving thing they can do is nothing at all. In the space that silence creates, self-respect begins to grow. The empath starts to see that peace is not found in constant connection, it's found in balance. Boundaries are a language of self-worth. The empath no longer needs to explain or defend their limits. They begin to understand that the right people will never be threatened by boundaries. They'll be grateful for them because boundaries create emotional safety. The avoidant, however, may feel discomfort when faced with an empath who no longer chases, explains, or overfunctions. That discomfort is the empath's quiet victory. It signals the end of emotional overdependence. It says, I'm no longer here to soothe your fear at the expense of my own peace. Boundaries shift the power from needing validation to giving self-validation. When the empath begins to hold space for themselves, they start to notice patterns that once blinded them. They see how they've tolerated inconsistency, excused avoidance, and mistaken emotional unavailability for mystery. With strong boundaries, they stop translating mixed signals into hope. Instead, they translate them into clarity. They can care deeply but still decide, I won't engage with confusion. I deserve communication that feels safe. That quiet assertion is how they outsmart the avoidant, not through control, but through calm detachment. Boundaries also teach the empath that love doesn't mean self-sacrifice. They learn that giving endlessly doesn't deepen love, it often depletes it. They start giving from overflow, not emptiness. They can listen without absorbing, care without carrying, and love without losing themselves. Each time they say no to emotional chaos, they say yes to inner stability. The avoidant might still play their dance of distance, but the empath no longer participates. They don't chase the withdrawal or plead for connection. They simply stay centered in their truth, knowing that love rooted in fear will never blossom into safety. In the end, boundaries become the empath's quiet superpower. They are not walls made of coldness but gates of discernment. They don't isolate, they filter. The empath no longer tries to fix what's broken in others, they protect what's whole within themselves. That calm, unwavering presence becomes more powerful than any chase. Boundaries are no longer acts of defense. They become acts of love, the kind of love that finally includes the empath, too. There comes a moment in every empath's journey when they finally understand that love was never meant to be a chase. For so long, the super empath has been conditioned to believe that effort equals worth, that if they just love a little harder, wait a little longer, and give a little more, the emotionally distant person will finally meet them halfway. But chasing love is an exhausting illusion. It keeps the empath locked in a cycle of proving rather than receiving, of hoping rather than experiencing. The turning point arrives when the empath realizes they don't need to chase anyone who truly wants to be caught. Love that needs pursuit is often love that lacks reciprocity, and real love doesn't demand exhaustion, it invites peace. When the empath stops chasing, they start choosing. That single shift changes everything. Instead of investing energy into decoding someone's mixed signals, they begin observing patterns and asking better questions. Does this relationship nourish me or drain me? Am I being met with equal effort, or am I holding the connection together on my own? This awareness moves them from emotional dependency to emotional intelligence. They learn that choosing means prioritizing what aligns with their peace rather than what fuels their longing. It means walking away not because they stopped caring, but because they finally started caring about themselves. For the avoidant partner, this change is unsettling. They're used to the empath's endless availability, the reassurance that no matter how far they pull away, the empath will always come back. But the moment the empath stops chasing, the dynamic collapses. Silence replaces pursuit, clarity replaces confusion, and the empath's calm presence speaks louder than any desperate plea for connection ever could. The avoidant begins to feel the absence not as punishment, but as a reflection of what they've lost, a love that no longer bends just to make them comfortable. Choosing over chasing doesn't mean the empath becomes cold or detached. It means they finally understand that love is a two-way movement. They no longer romanticize inconsistency or misinterpret emotional unavailability as depth. They understand that being chosen effortlessly is not boring, it's healthy. The thrill of uncertainty may have once felt intoxicating, but now they crave the steadiness of mutual respect. They start seeking relationships that feel like calm waters, not emotional roller coasters. This shift from adrenaline to alignment marks their emotional maturity. As the empath learns to choose, their entire energy changes. They become grounded, self-assured, and peaceful. They stop explaining their worth to people who can't see it. They stop performing emotional labor for those unwilling to meet them halfway. Instead, they invest in connections where communication flows easily, affection is consistent, and vulnerability feels safe. The avoidance old tactics, distance, silence, inconsistency no longer hold power. The empath sees them for what they are, defense mechanisms, not mysteries. The beauty of this transformation is that the empath doesn't need to prove anything anymore. Their presence becomes their statement. They no longer chase validation because they know love that's real doesn't require pursuit, it responds. They learn that the right person won't need convincing. They'll simply show up and stay. In that truth, the empath finds liberation not in being loved harder, but in choosing themselves first. Awareness over attachment is the moment the super empath steps into emotional adulthood. It's when they realize that understanding someone's wounds doesn't mean they must stay and suffer with them. For a long time, the empath confuses empathy with loyalty, believing that if they can just love the avoidant enough, they can heal them. But awareness brings truth, and truth is never cruel, only clarifying. It whispers, you can see their pain without carrying it. That single shift separates compassion from self-sacrifice. Awareness allows the empath to love with open eyes rather than blind hope, to feel deeply but stay grounded in reality. Attachment, especially for an empath, often grows from potential, not from what is, but from what could be. They see glimpses of vulnerability in the avoidant and mistake them for transformation. They build emotional stories around fleeting moments of connection, convincing themselves that patience and understanding will one day be rewarded with consistency. But awareness interrupts that fantasy. It teaches the empath to focus on patterns, not promises. A person's pattern tells the truth of their emotional availability far more than their words ever will. Awareness is seeing that a moment of affection doesn't erase a pattern of avoidance. It's realizing that someone can care about you and still not be capable of loving you the way you need. When awareness replaces attachment, the empath's decisions become clearer. They no longer chase closure or beg for emotional reciprocity. They stop trying to decode silence or justify inconsistency. Instead, they start asking, is this connection nourishing me or depleting me? They begin to evaluate relationships through the lens of peace, not pain. Awareness becomes their internal compass, guiding them away from emotional confusion and toward balance. They can still feel deeply, but they no longer lose themselves in someone else's emotional landscape. Awareness also introduces emotional accountability. The empath learns to observe their own patterns, why they're drawn to avoidance, why they equate effort with love, and why the familiar chaos of emotional distance once felt like connection. They begin to see that attachment often comes from unresolved wounds, not genuine compatibility. Through this self-awareness, they start healing from within rather than seeking validation from without. They understand that awareness is not about blaming themselves or others. It's about choosing differently. When the empath chooses awareness, they begin to respond instead of react. They can recognize an avoidance withdrawal as self-protection, not rejection, and they no longer take it personally. Instead of fighting to pull someone closer, they allow space. That space is not indifference, it's self-trust. It says, I can love you, but I will not abandon myself to keep you. The avoidant who once relied on the empath's emotional chasing now faces a version of them that is calm, discerning, and unbothered by emotional distance. That composure is what truly outsmarts avoidance, not anger, not withdrawal, but awareness. Over time, awareness gives the empath peace where attachment once gave anxiety. They no longer cling to relationships that demand emotional labor without mutual investment. They can care, but they can also let go. They can feel connection without losing clarity. Awareness doesn't make them love less, it teaches them to love wisely. It allows them to see not only who others are, but who they become when they choose themselves first. And in that state of calm knowing, the empath finally experiences the kind of freedom that attachment could never offer. Growth is the quiet revolution that transforms the super empath from a healer of others into a guardian of their own peace. For most of their lives, the empath's identity revolves around helping, fixing, and understanding people who resist emotional closeness. They carry relationships on their shoulders, mistaking endurance for strength and tolerance for love. But real strength doesn't come from how much pain one can absorb, it comes from how courageously one can evolve. Growth, for the empath, begins the moment they realize they no longer need to win the avoidant's affection or approval. They no longer crave validation from someone who doesn't have the emotional capacity to give it. Instead, they turn inward, realizing the real victory is not over the avoidant, but over the old version of themselves who accepted less than they deserved. When the empath chooses growth, everything starts to shift. They begin to see patterns with clarity instead of emotional fog. They recognize that attraction isn't always alignment, that sometimes what feels familiar isn't healthy, it's just unhealed. They start breaking the emotional habits that kept them trapped in cycles of overgiving, overanalyzing, and overstaying. Growth teaches them that love without balance is self-neglect. They stop romanticizing potential and start honoring consistency. The empath, who once believed that love meant self-sacrifice, now understands that love rooted in peace feels very different from love rooted in pain. The process of growth isn't glamorous, it's often lonely, quiet, and uncomfortable. There are moments when the empath feels the urge to go back, to chase, to fix again, because those patterns once gave them a sense of purpose. But with every step forward, growth whispers, "Stay with yourself." The empath learns to sit in discomfort rather than running back to chaos. They start to see that loneliness is not emptiness, it's space for healing. Through that stillness, they begin rebuilding their emotional world from a place of self-respect. As the empath grows, they stop seeking lessons in suffering. They no longer need pain to feel depth or struggle to prove love. Growth gives them emotional neutrality, the ability to observe without internalizing, to care without clinging, to understand without losing themselves. This neutrality is not coldness, it's maturity. It allows them to move through relationships with calm discernment. They can now identify emotional red flags early and choose not to engage. They can recognize genuine connection and open up fully without fear of losing their identity in the process. The avoidant who once relied on the empath's emotional pursuit is often caught off guard by this transformation. The same person who once begged for communication now values silence when peace requires it. The same empath who once accepted crumbs now demands authenticity. The avoidant no longer feels chased or needed, and that absence creates awareness not in the empath, but in the avoidant. They start realizing the depth of what they lost, someone who loved them deeply but no longer at the expense of themselves. Growth is how the super empath wins, not by maneuvering, controlling, or changing anyone else, but by evolving beyond the need to. They no longer compete for emotional space or validation. Their worth is no longer defined by another's response, but by their own alignment with peace, integrity, and purpose. Growth allows the empath to move from attachment to acceptance, from survival to sovereignty. They rise quietly, gracefully, and powerfully, not as someone who needs to be understood, but as someone who finally understands themselves. In the end, the journey of the super empath is not about conquering the avoidant or proving their strength through suffering. It's about awakening to their own worth. It's about realizing that love doesn't have to hurt to be real, and peace doesn't have to be earned through struggle. The true victory lies in awareness, boundaries, and growth, in choosing self-respect over rescue, clarity over chaos, and alignment over attachment. When the empath learns to love without losing themselves, they don't just outsmart the avoidant, they transcend the entire pattern. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for remembering that your empathy is not your weakness, it's your greatest power when guided by wisdom.